Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me, the man with the best hair to ever show up on this show for his second appearance, Drew Dinsick. He is of NBC Sports Bet, the Deep Dive podcast, Whale Capper, one of the great Twitter names. What is up, Drew? Great to have you back, buddy.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Matthew. And, I am at the point of time where it's been a while since we've gotten to actually talk about meaningful football. So I'm really excited to dive into some Vikings talk here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I know. There's sort of like a refreshing time right after the draft where you're reminded that they actually do play football games and they put, the teams out on there. We don't all have to watch YouTube highlights of whatever guy that our teams might draft and so forth. And we can all move forward with our lives. The schedule's coming out. It's very exciting. OTAs are happening. Come on. Football's right around the corner. So I've made up a bunch of Vikings bets, and I want you to explain them to me because you are my kind of go-to guy for anything related to gambling because I don't understand it at all. But I want to start with this. Just the broad how we should look at what Vegas, and I like finger quote like Vegas because it's lots of different books and things like that. But the general overarching, like, how should we use that information? Because in my analysis / reporting, the way that I've tried to use it is like, here's what everyone else thinks of your team. It doesn't have to come true, but that's kind of just a barometer of it's not just us being too close to it, looking too close to it. Here's kind of what the outside world thinks. Like, how should I be using this?
Yeah. So if you're a fan, if you're kind of very well connected and closely covering a team, it's impossible not to get caught up in recency bias and results-based analysis. Right? What's our record? What happened last week? Like, how are our guys performing? Like, the first thing that comes to mind is what did we just see on Sunday, right? And so, it's pretty common that the what you hear and what is talked about at sort of the most basic level isn't entirely in tune with what is predictive and what is a fair projection for a team, a player, an organization. And so, I think it's instructive. It's useful to look at the way, the numbers, and you can say Vegas, you can say the market. It doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it's all the same. Whatever sort of the group, group think about a team. That's pretty instructive in terms of like what's a baseline expectation for a given team, for a given for a given unit. And it's Vikings are an interesting one because there was a lot of last season where kind of perception and reality in terms of fans and kind of people who are close to the organization really got divorced from the way that the Vikings were being power rated just in the blind. You can definitely point to specific games where it was like, well, the people who believed in them were right. They got the win. It wasn't pretty, but they got it. And then you can point to other examples where it's like, man, they went off as many points favorites against that team. Really? Like, no way. So it's useful in my mind, at least, just to know what the people who are putting skin in the game, the people who are making wagers at a high level, what is their opinion of this team? Because that synthesizes much more some of the predictive nature of how to come up with a fair price for a team on a given game, against a given opponent or over the balance of a season. And so, when you look at certain odds, I would definitely keep a couple things in mind. Where are you looking? Right? If you're just looking at DraftKings or FanDuel, well, they're probably copying their price from someone else. It's, they're not really inclined to take a ton of sharp action. So, if there's, a player out there with a long track record of winning betting the NFL, and he's betting 50, 100K a pop, he's not doing it at DraftKings or FanDuel, right? And so, for the most part, you kind of need to know where to look to get a little bit of where the market makers are making their opinions known. And then, even beyond that, it's pretty obvious, at least in my experience, that the market's not always right. Like, it's not the answer key, but it's a good indicator of where sort of the middle is. What's the median expectation for a team in a given, game or a given season? And so, I think that's kind of the key as you look at win totals. It's the key as you look at you're going to hear in the next 48 hours, the schedule's coming out. Oh, here's the lines in all the games, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Here in May, there's a lot of noise in that, right? The numbers are going to move a lot between now and we get to like the beginning of training camp. And then that's even divorced from what the numbers will be once we get to actual, week by week spreads. It's really not common for people to get down huge positions on anything because of injuries, because of the dynamic nature of the NFL market. If a line pops and it's like, can you believe the Vikings are 3-point dogs at home to the Eagles week 3? Well, yeah, I mean, there are so many things that can happen between now and week 3, even that's not really telling you much. So, in some cases, super predictive, super valuable, huge part of the conversation. And in others, you just have to take the information and, kind of with the right context.
One of the funniest things that happened last year that I had never seen happen before was Vikings fans getting angry at betting lines because the betting line does not play strong safety. You are allowed to win the game. Like it doesn't mean you lost. It's like, oh well, we're underdogs to Dallas. Like, well, that you have to play. Your team is not impacted by this. But it was an interesting study though in getting that outside viewpoint of like, no one is believing this. And I think that was worth a lot of discussion last year because it was the 1-score games. It was like every single indicator we used to find out if a team is for real, they were going against it. It was only the wins that were coming week after week. But then when you look at the second half of the season, they need a massive comeback against the Colts. They get smacked by the Packers. Like they were much more of that average team. They barely escaped with a long field goal against the Giants and of course lost in the playoffs. So what everyone was saying about them through the first half of the season, all the indicators, all the people that spend their time kind of looking at all the predictive types of things all saw the same thing that eventually did come to fruition. So I thought that was an interesting study, and it doesn't always happen. A team could luck their way all the way to the Super Bowl. That has absolutely happened before. But I thought that last year was a great example of how we can use it, what it can tell us, and maybe what it would tell us is just your team needed more changes, or maybe even though they got away with some things in the previous offseason, they didn't actually have the right process because they were never that good to begin with, or whatever it might be. So I like to use it as an information source to tell me something that is from the outside world. And I think that it did a great job of doing that last year.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think you can point to specific games where people were probably like, we should be getting more credit. We have double-digit wins. Why? How come Vegas thinks we should be 2-point dogs on the road at Detroit? Well, you didn't cover, you didn't win. So they were right. And even in that, they were probably not adjusting you down enough. They got bet against pretty aggressively down the stretch. And, if you look at what an opening price is to what a price closes at, and you look at ones that were getting kind of relative aggressive moves against them, that's telling you that there's somebody out there who's skin in the game, taking strong positions against a given team. And I saw a lot of pretty heavy action down the stretch against the Vikings. And up until ultimately beating the Bears week 17, they didn't cover any of those final four, those final 5 games. And then of course, as 3-point favorites against the Giants in the playoffs, this, didn't manifest a trip to round 2. So it was pretty interesting the way that the Vikings got bet last year. And as we step, where I don't want to step on the overarching prep in the conversation here and get too far ahead of ourselves, but almost certainly the fact that the advanced statistics would tell you this was much more like an 8.5, 9-win team, and that 13 wins was overperforming. That gets baked into the next year's win total. And so you see a win total go up like 8.5, and you scratch your head and be like, how in the world we went 13 games last year? Now you're going to put 8.5 up there. This is an easy smash to the over. Well, I could tell you there's probably already some decent bets that have been made on the under. People definitely use that, kind of as more of a signal. And I'm starting to feel like we're at the point now where this has gotten so beaten to the death, and we've oversold the Vikings a little bit that I'm going to be a Vikings bull on this show and really throughout the entire preseason.
Okay, well, let's go down that road then, because I wanted to start with some of the obvious sort of bigger picture ones and then maybe get a little more ridiculous as we went along. And one thing that is hard, though, for someone like yourself to try to predict this is that things can still happen in this offseason. I don't know that Dalvin Cook maybe being released or traded would move your opinion at all, but Danielle Hunter might, and za'darius Smith might, because then you go from being an elite pass rushing team. I saw Mike Clay of ESPN had them as the top duo of defensive ends, which I think is fair. They were both in the top 10 by PFF in pressures last year. But if both are not here, then that who's rushing the passer? Like Marcus Davenport, who plays 500 snaps a year, right? I mean, I think that this is a big challenge because I can see why you're bullish on them because is that right? Yeah, bullish because I forget what bullish and bearish are, but
That's all good, man.
Yeah, so you know what I mean. I can see why you would look at them and say, oh, maybe we've overdone they were frauds, and maybe we've overdone the look at those Lions and Bears type of thing. So I feel you on that. But if you're trying to get in now on the numbers that just came out, I think it's a little tricky for an over-under.
Oh, yeah. Right. And I think that's entirely a fair point. I definitely don't lock up capital in May on football. Limits are a little bit lower. So if I want like a decent sized stake on anything that I'm going to like really plant my flag in for a regular season, I tend to wait until closer to, week one. And in general, my philosophy for preseason betting is I don't want to bet something that's around a coin flip. Like I want something that's going to have a little bit more meat on the bone. Like give me like $100 to win 5,000 type of stuff. Like there's not really a ton of interest in for me at least in getting super over your skis and like Vikings over or under 8.5 wins this year. And your point is very fair. Like not only will there still be roster shuffling. But preseason injuries tend to shape these markets as well. And while I don't think you're looking at a very high risk with the kind of the current Viking squad and who matters, you still really don't know about that. But it's fascinating to hear you talk about the edge depth in particular, because it's clearly the strength of the defense as rostered. And I would be very, very inclined if they make a move to hear an explanation as to why. Like, what is this ultimately providing to you in terms of roster building flexibility that you have to have going forward? Like, if you're going to cut, if you're going to move on and try to save cap and then roll that immediately into like a Justin Jefferson long-term deal or something, like, okay. Like no complaints. Like that makes total sense to me here. So, but at the same time, if you're literally like, well, we need to do this because we don't know what we're going to do with the quarterback next season, my answer would be, guys, you just thought about that last offseason. Like really and truly, taking the keys of the franchise like this, like you had a tough decision to make about what to do, and you took this path, and you can't kind of compound errors if you think you now want a different path. So it's going to be a real interesting test for this front office this season, particularly if, just variance bounces against them in the opposite way that last year bounced in their favor.
Yeah, a few things on that. One is, so you guys wanted Bryce Young, according to Tom Pelissero, to which I responded, I wanted a magical pony to ride to the stadium as well, but it was never going to happen. But if only we could figure out how the team got the number one pick. How was it? Was it by winning, having a mediocre team and winning just enough games to lose in the first round? Is that how you get Bryce Young? I'm just baffled to figure that one out. I can't figure out why that would be let out there. Like, is that to say to Kirk, like, we'll replace you, you should sign your extension? Or is it like, Kirk, please demand a trade? We want to tank this year. I can't really tell why they would have interest in putting that out there. Also, as far as but I don't want to stray from your question about the defensive line, because are you a chess player? Do you ever play chess?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. So you know what forced moves are, right?
Sure.
Like when you only have one move, you have to do it. That's what this is. Like Danielle Hunter is a forced move. They want Danielle Hunter. They want him to play football. But if he doesn't sign a long-term contract extension, how can you let him play out this year and forego a potential first-round pick from a desperate team? I mean, look what Bradley Chubb got last year in the trade market.
Oh,
Trading
great
for
call.
stars, right? I mean, Jamal Adams, Tyreek Hill, like if you're trading for stars, you get a lot for stars. So you kind of have to do that. And also the za'darius thing is just flat out weird. I mean, he signs a 2-year contract and then he doesn't want that contract anymore. But I think that's to do with the cash flow versus other players that performed like him. But the Vikings can't really do anything about it. So it might also be a forced move. So in that case, though, like now you're rebuilding. Now this, if you lose those guys, that's rebuilding. That's not really competing for this year, especially when you play Mahomes, Burrow, the Eagles, the 49ers. And that's where this is a situation that would affect how I'd feel about the over under part. But if I gave you $1,000 of my money and I said, go ahead,
Sure.
put it over or under, what would you do right now?
Right this minute, I have to play over 8.5. And the reason is not especially complicated. You stand back and you look at the macro environment in the NFL right now. And number one, offense is predictable, defense is not. Number two, the AFC is absolutely stacked with talent, and the NFC is not. Particularly at the quarterback position. You have a quarterback that is effective enough to get you to, at or above average in terms of offense this year. You have a top 5 offensive line. You have a top 5 receiving core. You have decent support from your running game. You have an offensive-minded coach who presumably in year 2 can take a step forward in terms of concepts, in terms of efficiency. So you're going to be in every game. You're going to be able to score. Your weaknesses, as I look at this roster, are you have a little bit inexperienced, maybe not a great secondary, and then your run stop looks like potentially a problem. Now, if your pass rush is as intact as it is today, if you have a lead in a game, you can let those guys pin their ears back, and you should be able to, take those leads into the, with your good offensive line and complementary running game, and with the pass rush, you should be able to put away leads and get wins. And then the one weakness of as long as your run D is like above sort of a minimum, Mendoza line sort of kind of concept. Like as long as you aren't like you can't get on the field because you can't get off the you can't force a punt or force a field goal. That as long as the other team can't play keep away, then you should be able to have comeback opportunities in games, and you have the weapons in the passing game to be able to do that. So I think as I look at this team, it looks to me like a little bit above an average NFL team because of the strength of the offense. Defense, again, not being as predictable. That unit may mature into a good defense, or they may ultimately need still a ton of investment to be above average. But guess what? If you're an average or above average team this year in the NFC, you're in like the top 4. Like the rest of the NFC looks so weak that you're going to just stockpile wins. And, there's sort of this promise of the future in Chicago and Detroit and Green Bay that really has never, you're banking on hope in a lot of those cases. And there's some weaknesses. There's questions on the rosters. There's questions about sort of what those teams did in their offseason in terms of becoming more competitive, really. Outside of the Bears, like the Bears were so weak last year, like adding any warm bodies was going to make that team better. But at the same time, there's still huge issues with that defense. And I would put the Vikings offense and the Bears offense side by side and tell you that there is a meaningful gap and the Vikings are better. So, I think realistically the Vikings still clearly the class of the NFC North. And for that reason, they should be, pretty clearly, in my opinion, able to get to 9 wins, even if variance is against them.
Yeah, so I've been working on just getting ready for the schedule release and trying to figure out, because of course I'm gonna, go live, pick all the games. What else is there to do? And that's always a fun time and everything else.
Of course.
But I've been, so I've been going through looking at and maybe how the schedule plays out will matter a little. I remember last year it impacted how I felt about it that they were going to London. Now, ultimately, they won the game in Miami that I thought that they would lose because they played their second and third string quarterback for the Dolphins. But, that would impact like where you're going and on the road and stuff like that. And I don't know for sure where I'm going to go, but I keep landing on 9 or 10 and debating a few games and whatever with myself. And I just feel so boring for doing it. I just it's like I gave them a B grade for the draft. Great. Like that's a hot one. And then, I'm going to say that they're a 9-win team. Like, come on, give me something. But I also feel like that's probably the right way to go with this team because it's hard to make an argument. You look at the way Detroit matched up with them last year. For one, Detroit should have won the first game, then really crushed them offensively in the second game. Detroit has built up their defense. They've really built up their secondary, which there's a funny stat about Kirk Cousins. He has like 117 quarterback rating in his career against the Lions, 23 touchdowns, 2 picks in his career against the Lions. It's absurd. But I think that's over. Like they signed really good players in the secondary. They've drafted defense. I think that this matters a lot. So I can buy everything that they're selling. They brought back their offensive coordinator and look like Gibbs is going to play and he's going to catch footballs and run with them. And like he'll impact their offense. It wasn't the best draft decision, but that's a player who can help them right away. So it's hard to convince me that the Lions aren't better, but yet is it so much better that a few things couldn't go wrong for them and the Vikings end up at the top of the division? Like I can absolutely see that. And I just can't really buy into Chicago or Green Bay as being good enough with their complete rosters and flawed quarterbacks to get to 10 or 11 wins.
I completely agree with you. I think the teams, as you're going through your schedule exercise, the teams that have like high-end mobile quarterbacks, because again, like that's kind of the future of the NFL, at least in the near term, is so many defenses play the too high safety concept, and they really are like they ask your quarterback, okay, do the easy stuff, and if you have mobility, you're going to be able to matriculate the ball down the field, and it's going to you're going to have success on offense. But we're not going to let you beat us over the top. We're not going to, let you just, pick us apart 15, 20 yards down the field unless you are like an elite level passer. And as I kind of look at the teams on their schedule, like if you go up against a team that has a quarterback that can make it happen on the ground, and just in general, like a good run game conceptually. Now I'm a little nervous. I mean, the Eagles are probably the obvious example, and people probably remember that Monday Night Football game from last year that was like really pretty much non-competitive. That the Eagles are still going to frustrate this this defense even with the new concept. The Bears may, because of just Fields, dynamite athleticism, maybe. But again, like your pass rush should be able to get him sacked 7 times, 6 times. I mean, realistically, like you should be able to counter that. And then, Falcons on the schedule with one of the more dynamic running attacks, just because of sort of the nature of their roster is intriguing to me. But then besides that, there's not a lot of teams on here that I think the defense is super vulnerable against. You're going to be in games against the Niners. You'll be in games against the Bengals and the Chargers. You'll definitely, have advantages over the likes of the Buccaneers, the Saints, the Packers, in my opinion, and the Broncos. Panthers are on your schedule too. So yeah, I mean, I can see pretty clearly, like if you can split your Lions home and away, and if you can, counter whatever step forward the Bears take with Fields, I think the Vikings likely win the North, and I think 10 wins is a reasonable expectation.
I do have a rule that I always split them with Chicago with a loss in Soldier Field because they have. I investigated this once. They have the funniest and most bizarre history at Soldier Field. Like they lost to Chad Hutchinson once. I mean, we did a look at this. We even looked at the Vegas lines for the games and how they performed, and it was just so improbably bad against Chicago. It was like, what are they banging on garbage cans and cheating somehow? Like, what is going on? And considering how bad Chicago was forever. And my first year covering the team was 2016. So I went to Chicago thinking, oh, this is going to be a bloodbath or whatever. Jordan Howard runs for 70 yards to start the game. The Vikings no shows. Like, what is going on? Like, it's been a house of horrors for them unless they play Nathan Peterman and Tim Boyle. So I'm gonna probably split that one. But let's talk about some of those that are hard debates. I think Denver is a hard one to figure out because I've seen Sean Payton coach in person a number of times. He's pretty good at it. This is not Mike Zimmer's defense for those guys to go toe to toe. Brian Flores, I think, can improve them, but with the secondary being what it is, how much can he improve them? How much do we buy that Russell Wilson was Nate Hackett's fault? Like all these things, I think are very difficult, and it is going to Denver, I believe, right? So that's a little tricky. The punts are going to fly really far. Like I don't know. Like that one is a very hard one for me to pick.
Yeah, I think if the offensive line for the Vikings holds up in that game, you got them in spades. Honestly, the way that Sean Payton and the Broncos conducted their offseason, to me, screamed, we're not making a long-term investment around Russell Wilson. And on top of that, like maybe their defense is top 5 in the NFL, but there are huge questions about how this offense is going to get to 24 points, let alone 20 points, let alone 24. So if the Vikings can find a way to get into the mid-20s in that game, I think they win, and I think that'll come down to if their offensive line can keep Kirk upright, because Vikings, they've got the advantage with wide receiver 2, tight end, wide receiver 3, running back against the rest of the squad. Other than Pat Surtain, there's a lot of ways I think you can attack that unit.
Surtain Jefferson should be pretty good.
Great mashup.
Yeah, definitely. And the other one was the 49ers. That one is so tricky to me because who is playing quarterback for the 49ers? Is it Sam Darnold? I mean, what are we supposed to even think of Trey Lance? Like, how's Brock Purdy's elbow? Is Kyle Juszczyk playing quarterback? Like, what is going on? Our pets' heads are falling off. What is happening here? And yet I'm still going to pick against the Vikings because they always get their faces beat in by that defense.
Yeah. I don't have an answer yet. And honestly, like if there's one kind of soul searching thing that I'm going to have to do all offseason, it's going to be figuring out the 49ers, because Kyle Shanahan's ability to elevate a quarterback of lesser talent to some baseline level where they can compete and win games based on defense and their rushing attack. You can't argue with it at this point. And think about last year with like Geno Smith in Seattle, right? Like reclamation project, guy ends up as comeback player of the year, goes to the playoffs, like had a chance to win the NFC West at one point, and like that was a surprise. Should it surprise anyone if that's like the Sam Darnold arc this year under Kyle Shanahan? Probably not. I mean, he was a top 3 pick, right? He has the pedigree from a draft standpoint, and he's going to have Deebo Samuel to work with. A great set of wide receivers, Christian McCaffrey. He's going to be well protected with the offensive line anchored by Trent Williams. So, like the Niners to me are kind of much more a case of, do they stay healthy? Because I honestly think that this campaign that they're going through this year, they have a win now team that's going to be quarterbacked by Sam Darnold. I believe. I think if I had to guess, I think Trey Lance maybe, is looking for a job or is traded for, spare parts at some point in this offseason or in the preseason. And I think Brock Purdy with the elbow surgery is not going to be ready until like December. And at that point, if Sam Darnold is clicking in this offense and they're winning games and they're at their potential, then he probably just sees the campaign to its fruition. I don't see these guys as world beaters, certainly the way the market does. I mean, if we weren't living in a world where the NFC was this weak and this winnable, I don't think you would see them as sort of the second choice in the Vegas market. And, there's a chance that they drift a little bit in price too, as people kind of wrap their head around, oh, wait, this is Sam Darnold. If you have some listeners that like making some long shot bets, one of the only football bets I've made so far this season is Sam Darnold, comeback player of the year. 50-1. Again, kind of he fits the Geno Smith mold, and that market is all completely out of whack because DeMar Hamlin is like this enormous favorite. I don't know that the Bills are really going to trot him out there and play much more than a handful of kind of celebratory, like ceremonial snaps. I really don't know that he's going to be, utilized as a kind of player throughout the season. So I think that's a fun market to bet into. And if Kyle Shanahan does what he did with Mr. Irrelevant, except now he has, the third, draft pick number 3 talent in Sam Darnold, then why not comeback player of the year at 50-1? So something's going on with the Niners, but I think the Vikings have given them a test.
Well, obviously they're going to trade for Kirk after June 1st, then blow up everything you got. Then your Sam Darnold bet won't go that well. But it sounds like there's at least been some sort of discussion somewhere. Now they all know each other. The Vikings and 49ers from the Rams connections. They practiced against each other last year. So whatever that combine buzz was about them asking about Trey Lance or asking about Kirk, I don't know how much was really there, but they can trade Kirk with their salary cap situation after June 1st. So I am obligated to say that now, just in case that maybe comes to fruition, which was one of the bets that I had written down to ask you about, which isn't an actual bet you can make, but this is your job to figure these things out. So that's what you're here for. Who would you bet is the quarterback of the Vikings in 2024? Like, you can just say a draft pick quarterback, Kirk, some other guy who comes from another team. Like, how would you weigh that? Because that is like the fundamental question that even with a season on the horizon, we are still talking about, like, what is going on with this quarterback situation after they passed on Levis and decided to go with Jordan Addison and have talked to Kirk about an extension, but haven't gotten it done. It's very murky.
You want a wild one?
Yes.
And this is so. I'll throw a little cold water on Cousins to the Niners just because I think, and I mean, maybe you may know better than I do about what his contract situation and status is of that. But the Niners to me seem like they're keeping that seat warm for Brock Purdy. Like, they feel like they've stumbled upon like the diamond in the rough of all diamonds, and that they're ultimately gonna go to war with him in 2024. Best of luck to them. I mean, Tommy John surgery, maybe his elbows now. He's the rookie of the year. He's throwing the ball over the mountains or whatever. But
and just real quick, by the way,
yeah.
In the regular season, he had more turnover worthy plays.
Of course,
than he did big time throws. And just pointing that out, it's more Case Keenum-y than it was like, oh, we found the next Brady. At least in my opinion, right?
Couldn't agree more. But they seem to be prepared to go down that path. Best of luck to them. I think an interesting candidate for Vikings QB, because again, like, you now have Kevin O'Connell, who's been through what the Rams went through, where they were like, couldn't get it done with Goff. They pulled the trigger for Matt Stafford, bring him over, win a Super Bowl. Like, I think there may be a little bit of, they try to relive that history with the Rams because they have a talented enough team otherwise. The candidate for the kind of the make the move for the quarterback is probably Kyler Murray. I think the Cardinals are going to be the losingest team in football this year. I don't think this is a hot take. I mean, maybe the Colts are down there because if they start Anthony Richardson week 1 and they really let him take his lumps, it's going to take them a while to find wins. But I can see the Cardinals looking to not only, lose intentionally, but like they may not have a choice. Like, it's just a very, very bad roster. And so I think realistically, they're going to be in a position where they could sell Kyler Murray for a relatively low trade price. And shoot, man, they may end up, some team may end up kind of taking, not unlike the Lions did. Like, they took back, they may end up, doing a pretty sweet deal just to get him off the books in Arizona. If they hold the number 1 overall pick next year and have the likes, can take a swing at Drake May or Williams out of USC. So, I think Kyler Murray is going to be on the move next offseason, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to try to rebuild around him, considering the turnover at GM there. And the fact that the Cardinals could have 2 top 5 picks in the round 1 next year. So I'm going to go with Kyler Murray. And I think I'm going to get a price on that in like the 25-1 range, because I think you probably build out the probabilities and it's like 50% chance they bring back Kirk Cousins. He's not old enough to think that his performance is just going to completely deteriorate anytime soon. And they may, if they make it to like an NFC championship game or something this season, it's going to be very tough to let him walk out the door. Instead of just kind of giving him some sort of, kind of continue the bridge, I guess. So Kirk Cousins is your favorite for QB in 2024 at like 50%, I would say. And then the other 50% is wherever they land in the draft, they swing on a quarterback, or they make a trade for an established vet. And I would put it, 50% Kirk, 40% they draft a quarterback, and then 10% that they trade for an established vet like Kyler Murray. And I don't know. I kind of think that's a decent little fit there, but we'll see.
Salary cap wise, it's a little dicey because the way they did the restructure is if Kirk leaves, they take this huge cap hit. But as as Andrew Brandt will say on Twitter, if you want anything to happen in the short term, you can make it happen with the salary cap. So not impossible that they could figure something out. Maybe it's an extended trade, or I don't know. Something could work out with Kirk Cousins and his cap if they really wanted Kyler Murray. There's ways to restructure. There's ways to have the other team take some cap. Like, you could do lots of things. I think that's really interesting. And also, the one thing that this kind of bizarre report about them thinking they might be able to trade up for Bryce Young would tell you that they're not afraid of a short quarterback. That though Kevin O'Connell, a former quarterback himself, is 6'5" and towers over all of us, and he does not. And they drafted Jaron Hall too, who is like very small. So they clearly are not terrified of the little guy being the quarterback. I think that would be insane fun. Even if it blew up. I felt this way about Lamar Jackson because the Vikings got slightly connected to Lamar Jackson. And my thing was like, look, if you're going down, go down with that guy being your quarterback. Like, go down without question. Kyler, right? With Kyler.
Yeah.
And I buy into, to some extent, that Cliff Kingsbury was a problem, that Steve Keim was a problem, and that most quarterbacks are a product of what's around them to maximize their skills. And I don't think Cliff Kingsbury ever really did that. But like, lest we forget that only in 2021, 3/4 of the way through the season, we're like, this dude's the MVP. He destroyed the Vikings in 2021. He had an insane game against them. It was like, oh man, he's taken that next step and everything else. The guy plays a little video games, tears an ACL, has a bad season, and then with a horrible roster, and all of a sudden now he's like not worth it. That's a very intriguing option. I think that I might draft a quarterback even with Kirk Cousins at the moment, just because I think that Kirk is the all-time dig your heels in to get the contract you want guy. And if the Vikings are not giving him the years he wants, he's just going to sit on it. And he's going to be like, you know what? Somebody else will. I guarantee you. Somebody paid Daniel Jones. He's not good. Someone paid Derek Carr. That's the same exact person. That's a Spider-Man meme. I mean, like, that's right. So if you're Kirk, you're like, no, I think, what did Carr get? Like a 4-year, 150 or something? Like, I'm waiting for that one if I'm Kirk. So I think that's very, very possible.
Interesting. Okay. Love all of those thoughts. I mean, Kyler Murray to me is like this generation's Matt Stafford, just because like he's good enough to keep you in purgatory. He's a health risk always. But at the same time, like, you get a healthy season out of him, you could win a Super Bowl. Like, that's kind of his ceiling. So he'll be interesting to see if ultimately the Cardinals want to build around him, or if they want to try to move him next season. The Kirk Cousins points you make are very fair. I don't think he's doing team friendly anything for anyone. And the Derek Carr contract, if that is available, boy, if you're the Vikings, I think you hard pass on being the team that signs that deal. And I guess the one thing you do have for, like, as a negotiating leverage if you're the Vikings, is a lot of the teams that will need quarterbacks next year just drafted them. So you had four teams in the out of 32 take a swing on a guy that they think is going to be the next, because they're going to give him 3 years to prove yay or nay if he's the next franchise QB. So we're starting to musical chairs a little in terms of running out of seats for someone to really make a bad decision. And I don't think there's really anyone in the AFC that's going to talk themselves into, well, maybe we could beat the Chiefs or the Bills or the Bengals if we bring in Kirk Cousins. So, your pool of available suitors for Cousins is is maybe the Commanders and the Rams if Stafford retires, and
That would be so funny if
I'm running out of options. Yeah.
under new ownership he goes back to Washington,
Oh yeah.
like new team
Hilarious.
name and everything.
Yeah.
In his
Yeah.
press conference, he says, "You like that? I'm back." That would just be the worst.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right about that. Although I would say that every year we feel like, man, it seems like every team's got it resolved, and then by November, like, oh my God, there's 13 teams that need quarterbacks. So I'm always kind of
That's a great point. That's
keeping
fair.
that in mind. The only other like actual serious bet I had, and we can rapid fire some ridiculous ones at the end. Unless you think it was ridiculous to talk about Kyler Murray. I don't though,
No.
because I think that
No.
they have
Yeah.
eyes on anybody who could potentially be available. But Jordan Addison and Rookie of the Year. I like this a lot. I
Okay.
think a lot of the fantasy people that maybe know what they're doing to some extent have kind of targeted this as somebody who could get a lot of footballs thrown his way. Being a good route runner, being in a system where everyone's going to put their attention toward Justin Jefferson, a conscientious head coach of players' skill sets. They're going to put him in the slot, like all those things. I mean, it kind of screams to me that he could put up some numbers, but you also have quarterbacks. And if they play even halfway decent, they get Rookie of the Year. How do you assess that market?
I'm prepared to toss these QBs, honestly. Not because I have like low opinions of them, but just these teams are going to lose. And honestly, like we don't really know, other than Bryce Young, we really don't know who's going to get thrown to the Wolves week 1 yet. These guys may sit for a little while, like Baker Mayfield kind of deal, where they come in week 10 as a rookie and they just don't have enough time to make up the ground, even if they are playing well. And so I think the quarterbacks are tosses for me. The big question is, can you beat Bijan Robinson in this market? Because I mean, I know smart people that have made cases that he's like a bet for offensive player of the year. It's a very, very, very good run offense, very good run blocking offensive line, and a very weak schedule, weak division. But then again, like, if he's a candidate for offensive player of the year and people have kind of decided that that's your vote, maybe vote for another rookie, right? Like, he's going to get 2 awards, or are we going to try to, spread the love a little bit? So, I think Addison is in a tier with 3 wide receivers that you have to say are all very live. And he's probably actually maybe even just 2. I would put him and Quentin Johnson at the very top of the pile for potentially producing enough in good offenses, in teams that are going to win enough games, be in the mix for a playoffs, that are going to get awards consideration. And so I think realistically, if you're making a bet in the Rookie of the Year market, you're looking for Addison, Quentin Johnson, or you just swallow the price and play Bijan Robinson.
Right, because Smith-Njigba is just not going to get the ball enough, even if
I don't think
he's
so. Yeah.
good. Yeah, they're going to throw it to the other guys. I think they got him in part because DK Metcalf signed a short-term deal, and Tyler Lockett's not super young, and they made a smart move in that. But that's probably not a right now impact. The Bijan Robinson thing, it just kind of blows my mind sometimes how with every other position, it's like, well, we got to wait and see. He's a rookie and, we'll find out. And there's an adjustment period and everything else. If a running back gets drafted high, it's like star, superstar. He's the best running back ever. And it's like, do we not remember Trent Richardson or all the other dudes who got hurt all the time that were, quote, generational prospects? I'm not rooting against him. He seems like a super fun player, but it's just a weird phenomenon where if a team drafts like a defensive end, it's like, well, we'll see if he can get his wingspan to match up with his quick twitch or something. But with a running back, it's a star. He's a star. Everyone's drafting him number 1 in fantasy. It's just like, I don't really understand why that's so much different. Leonard Fournette, the guy wasn't even any good. Like, and he was number 4 overall pick. There were 5th rounders, Aaron Jones, who were way better running backs than him. I don't know. I think it's the hardest position. If you told me that Dwayne McBride ended up with more yards, I'd be like, I don't know, maybe. That's running backs.
Yeah, and I mean, if he had landed on a team that drafted running back because they've had a tough time getting the running game going, like the Texans was a good example. Like, if he had landed on the Texans, I would have said, okay, let's bet against this guy. But the fact that he's on the Falcons with Art Smith and he's kind of going to slot right into a 200 carry, 50 catch, 50 target at least, maybe 80. Yeah, still say 60 targets, 200 rushing attempts role. If he's even close to what we expect, and if he stays healthy, then he's going to be really, really tough to beat. Just based on production, is this from memory. Saquon Barkley was about plus 100 for Rookie of the Year preseason, and he ultimately won a little bit of a split vote, but he beat Lamar Jackson, who went undefeated in like 7 starts and took the Ravens to the playoffs improbably. He beat Baker Mayfield, who put together, not a ton of wins, but some very impressive numbers through a limited campaign. And I think there were a couple of really good wide receivers in that class too. So if you have the quote unquote generational guy that's just going to get volume and they're tough to beat in these Rookie of the Year markets historically. So that's kind of the context that I kind of look at that market with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the playmaker really has a better chance than the quarterback, especially since this league still beats the faces in of rookie quarterbacks.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I mean, it's so funny. Like Joe Burrow, there were people doing film things, breaking down, and there's only so many of them that you can trust, but breaking down, like, you could see here, he can't make this throw or whatever. Then he hurts his knee and it's like, oh man, this is just going to go bad. The dude comes back and he's a freaking megastar immediately, because that's life as a quarterback. You go through this train wreck of off season and then have to learn an offense, learn to play in the NFL, learn receivers, learn coaches. You're on a horrible team. Like, it's just a mess. And then by year 2, sometimes you're great, but it's hard to bet on those guys because of that. And so I think Addison has a good chance for that reason, that you could just kind of throw him in that mix. Let me give you some silly ones. Just do rapid fire here, because you've got bets to make and hair to perm or whatever. And so you're got things to do. But okay, so a couple I wrote down. Over under 3.5 more years, Kevin O'Connell is the head coach of the Vikings.
Okay, I'm gonna go with over, and it is. I'm assuming I'm getting even odds. Yeah, 50.
Yeah, sure. We're not.
Okay, right.
I don't even know how to do that correctly.
Okay, we'll say I get. I got to pick them on both sides here. I'm gonna go with over 3.5, because just in general, I think the ability to win in this week NFC and kind of continue to just not really be on the hot seat because you're not producing from a wins losses standpoint is pretty easy bet to make positively. You have blue chip players on offensive line and wide receiver that you can continue to build around. And I think you have a front office that ultimately they may not have made the moves that that cement this franchise as a perennial contender yet. But I've seen enough, and I've seen enough pragmatism and enough, kind of just they're letting it come to them a little bit, that I think kind of later in the real kind of swing years that you worry about for an over under 3.5. I think the Vikings, I believe in them to be still kind of championship aspirational, if not like knocking on the door. So I think Kevin O'Connell's going to stick around, and honestly, he kind of fits the prototype and the mold of guys that are really going to be able to succeed, just because he's on the offensive side of the ball. Like, he understands the concepts, and somebody's going to figure out the busters for the way the defense is being run right now, right? Like, Fangio kind of cooked up the current conceptual framework that everybody's copying, and we have yet to see anyone really come up with the busters for that, but somebody's going to, and so might as well be Kevin O'Connell with the weapons he has to work with. So I think he's going to be around for 4 years, and I think in general the Vikings stand out to me pretty clearly as one of the franchises that's willing to invest in sort of the intangibles, like the training room and the like keeping everybody happy and healthy, and and just kind of in general doing the small things right that should help you get a couple extra wins over the balance of 4 years. So that marries pretty hand in hand with Kevin O'Connell sticking around for the long term, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is the over under number for like how long coaches usually last is like less than 3 years, but that last part I think is hugely important. Like getting the top grade on the NFLPA study, I
Yeah,
imagine their ownership was through the roof with that because they care a lot about all that stuff. Clearly, a team like Arizona doesn't, since their floorboards are popping up
yes,
and the Jaguars have rats or whatever. But like, this is really, really important to the Vikings as a franchise owners. So it would have to be a total disaster, which it's very hard to see unless Jefferson leaves, and then that's a whole other
sure,
conversation.
sure,
But
yeah,
okay, so another one that I had was Justin Jefferson last year got MVP votes.
yeah.
Uh, Over under zero point 0.5 MVP votes that he gets again. And part of this baked in is like, was it just kind of a novelty for last year? Because I could see him having the same statistical season, but it became kind of like a cute talking point of like, could a receiver really win MVP? What's a that kind of thing. So, but you think that he gets at least one person is like JJ MVP?
I'm gonna go under. Because I think you're right. I think it was a little bit of a novelty last year in terms of why people went to the well voting for wide receiver, and also because the quarterbacks in the conversation this year, like realistically, should get almost all of the 1 through 5s, right? You get another year forward, better offensive system around Justin Herbert. You get another year forward, same offensive system around Joe Burrow. Pat Mahomes is always going to be in the mix. Josh Allen is going to be in the mix likely. And then Jalen Hurts is probably going to win, double-digit games in the NFC and be your, presumptive 1 seed. And so those 5 guys, I think, are going to lock up a huge lion's share of the voting block. And then this isn't even counting if there's like a surprise, right? Like if there's the Jets get the 1 seed in the AFC, we got to talk about our Aaron Rodgers is back in the conversation. Or I don't think that's going to happen, but if that did happen, then he's going to get talked about. To hold your, don't hold your breath, Vikings fans, but definitely gird your loins, prepare yourself just in case. So ultimately, I don't think it has anything to do with expectation of production this year. But because he can equal or better what he did last year, and what he did last year wasn't even as statistically anomalous as like Cooper Kupp the prior year. From a wide receiver. So it's not like he did something we've never seen before. But I do think overall the quality of quarterback play is going to push him down the board in terms of who gets votes this year.
Yeah, I think Vikings fans won't care if Aaron Rodgers wins the MVP as long as it's not for the Packers. He can do whatever he wants. He can lock himself in whatever dark room he wants. He can drink whatever tea, just be gone, I think is how they feel. Okay, last one, and you've been incredibly generous with your time. Really, really love the conversation, but I think you'll like this one. So I wanted to make sure I got it in. Over under 3.5 fourth quarter comeback / game winning drives for Kirk Cousins after tying the all-time record of 8. Will he clear 3.5?
3.5
this
that's
year.
good.
17
that's a really
games.
good number.
He plays only close games. Did you see that stat the other day? It was from someone that I don't really have a lot of respect for, but they had a stat that they threw out there about the double-digit victories over the last 5 years. And the Vikings were tied with the Texans or something. It was like they never win games by double digits in general. So there will be close games with Kirk Cousins. You know that. Other teams are going to score. There's going to be shootouts, but will he come up with 3.5 game-winning drives or fourth quarter comebacks?
That's such a good number because you kind of hit the key point on the head at the end there. There's going to be a handful of shootouts on their schedule. Vikings are an over team. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Their totals are going to be in the 51, 54 range for, especially when they're indoors and it's good, nice weather part of the season. And so it's going to come down to kind of end of the game execution a lot for them. So they're going to get into the 3 to 4 range, I think. I would be blown away if they even sniff 8 again. That was one weirdness that really got them there that last year. But I will say this, I'm going to go under after hemming and hawing there for a bit. And it's only because I think that the makeup of this team in terms of how they win ball games, assuming they keep their, they're assuming the strength that they have right now on at the edge position holds. I think that their blueprint for them winning games is going to be offensive efficiency through three quarters, and then running the ball late and putting the ball away on defense with pass rush. And for those reasons, I think, a win for the Vikings looks like, the last 4 minutes of the game, you're doing a lot of kneeling the ball.
Yeah, I think I will go under just because no one ever approaches that again after they've done that. You know what I mean? Like, it just is impossible.
Yeah.
I think his career high before might have been only 4. It's not a stat I ever really paid a whole lot of attention to until last year, because a dude makes a 61-yard field goal and you get a game-winning drive for that. You didn't even really come close to the end zone.
That one was cheap. There was a couple other ones for the Vikings. I got to relook at their schedule, but you're absolutely right.
Interception from Josh Allen in the end zone, like they're a few yards away from winning the game. They fumble, whatever. You get a game-winning drive. So even Cousins talked about how this is a silly stat, and it's like, I don't know what to make of it. So I would go under just because that's not really something that anybody ever repeats from year to year. I think Stafford may have had 3 the year after he had 8. So, but that was a fun one. I like your answer to that. Follow him on Twitter at WhaleCapper, as long as Twitter still exists until it goes.
We'll see.
Whatever. Bet the Edge
take the
podcast.
under on that.
Yeah.
But,
Let me promote you, Drew, please.
Sure, of course.
Bet the Edge podcast, NBC Sports Bet deep dive podcast as well. You're the best, man. Like, you always provide such interesting, unique insights, and I love getting together with you. So this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we could do it.
Absolutely. And I hope all of your prep for the season goes well. And, I think this is the payoff year for the Vikings on the, no one believes in us kind of mindset, because I got to tell you, there's going to be a lot of prognosticators who are finding reasons to pick the Lions, the Packers, and even the Bears to win the NFC North. And we just gotta be patient. And then we got to get the best price available right at the end of the cycle, right before they go on and win their, 10, 11 games.
One person in media will bet the Vikings and Kirk Cousins for MVP just because they get super bored in mid-July, like before training day. It will happen. That is my best bet lock of the century. So
that's already grading that a winner. You can grade that one a winner. Yeah.
Thanks again, Drew. And thanks everybody for listening as always.